Kia ora, my name is Aaron Stallard and I'm standing for the Central Ward in this year's local body elections. Now, the Tasman Chamber of Commerce has kindly invited all candidates to submit a video saying why people should vote for them and what they would do in terms of advancing business in Nelson. So firstly, I'll start by introducing myself, a bit about my background. Then I'll look at some of the ways in which council can help business in Nelson, examine some of what I think are the realities of the business environment over the coming decade or so. Then I'll have a brief look at, if I were privileged enough to be elected to council, what would be the basis for some of my decision making around the council table, and then look at how that feeds through to some policies for the region. Then we'll wrap it up. So first of all, a bit about my background. I'm a geologist. I'm a father of 3 adult children. About 15 years ago, I established and still run today a service export company with clients in mainly Asia and Europe. It helps researchers to publish their work in international journals. I'm active in the community with Save the Maitai, Zero Carbon Nelson Tasman. I'm a volunteer at the Nelson Community Food Bank, and previously I was involved in the Stop the Coal Monster campaign. Now, as I said, my children have recently left home. My business is quite mature. It can largely run itself thanks to some excellent staff, and that means I'm in a position to stand for council, give back to the community. Now, I am standing because I do want to help shape a better future for all of us, and because I believe I have the skills and experience to perform well in this role and to represent the community. So for more on that side of things, please feel free to check out my website at aaronstallard.co.nz. Okay, so let's get underway. Firstly, how can council help business in Nelson? Well, I believe the council can help business in 3 initial ways, and that's to do with getting people living in the city centre, getting people to visit and spend time in the city centre, and also revitalising that part of Nelson. So let's look at those in turn. So we've started to see some apartment building in central Nelson, which is fantastic, and that needs to continue. By my rough estimate, there are about 28,000 square metres of the city centre that's currently in car yards, new and used cars. So let's have a conversation about that, and it has started. There have been some media articles about the potential for apartments on that kind of land, and we should be considering whether we think that is a good use of that land in terms of what we're planning and what aspirations we have for the city. Because if we were to build medium-rise, high-density apartments on 28,000 square metres of land in the city centre, we'd be housing a large number of people, and it would really change the city dramatically. If intensification is done well, we would have the benefits of energy efficiency, reduced emissions, reduced transport demand, a livelier city, greater spending in the city, more events and creativity, and we could live there rather than, for example, the alternatives such as urban sprawl into the Maitai Valley. Okay, so what about the city itself? It's a wonderful place. It's got a great location, framed by hills to the west and east, the ocean to the north, and Pikimai to the south. It is limited in its current design in that it somehow resembles a drive-through shopping mall, something like that. We can change that so it's a place where people live and they enjoy spending time there long periods of time because it is more people-friendly. Rather than being built for cars and car parks and so on. So we can change it so people want to visit, shop, eat, see a movie, meet friends, and certainly there's scope for more traffic calming in the city at the moment, pedestrianisation, trees, and I know that businesses are crying out for staff, trying to attract talent to the region and retain that talent, and to do this we need to invest in the city centre, apartments, community facilities like a new library at a site that's safe from flooding, and a library that's got an affordable price tag, an urban play area for children, and that's underway. We already have great galleries and museums, suta, cafes and parks and so on, so let's get people living there. This all feeds into a concept you might be aware of, the whole 15-minute city idea, that For most people from where they live, within 15 minutes walking or cycling, they can access all the things they need for a good life. And certainly we could apply that concept to Central Nelson, also to Tahunanui and to Stoke. So that within a short distance, without even needing to hop in the car, you can access schools, shops, supermarket, cafes, parks, recreational facilities, the transport hub, health services, and so on. So I believe we can bring Central Nelson into the 21st century with living centrally, people-friendly spaces, pedestrianisation, and emphasis on active and public transport. So that journey has begun, and it's up to Council to continue the good work. Now, I'd like to briefly touch on some realities of our business future, some key concepts that we should, I believe, bear in mind, because they will affect both business and council operations and planning decisions for all of us. We won't go into them in detail, but just to get them into our conversation. First is that obviously we will have reduced emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and this means big change in our systems of energy, food production, and transport. We have a limited remaining carbon budget, and we should spend it wisely to ensure we're prepared for our low carbon future. Now, a consequence of this reduced emissions is an energy decline. Remember that renewables make up just 30% of our total energy. And if we stay on a path of increasing energy use, that our targets, our emission reduction targets, just get pushed further and further away out of grasp. We'll never meet them. So I do believe a reality of our near future is having less energy and high energy prices. Unfortunately, we are near the end, I believe, of quite a brief era in history of mass international tourism and what I would call hypermobility that we've enjoyed for about 50 years. So I'm referring to really access for many people to planes and cars and so on, and being super mobile. So really, I think we should be factoring this into our decision making. And any business that's directly or indirectly energy intensive should look carefully at the business plan and consider how they'll operate in a low emissions, low energy world. And as ratepayers, and if I'm elected to council, that means looking at, for example, Nelson Airport with the $30 million or so of debt it's carrying from building the new terminal, and the realities of declining emissions and people flying less in the future, how the airport will operate and balance its books. Now finally, we're seeing two contrasting views of the way forward as we move away from fossil fuels. The first is what we call green growth, where we seek to grow GDP as we have in the past. We employ technological fixes, replace fossil fuels like for like with renewables, and otherwise continue as we are. Now, I don't believe this path is feasible or consistent with staying within what we might call safe environmental limits, and we'll look at those a bit more later. But this is the path chosen by pretty much every developed country on Earth and advocated for by most major organizations in the UN and so on. The second path is degrowth, where we plan and manage reductions in production and consumption until we are actually operating within safe environmental limits. And when I say limits, the obvious example is climate change, but there are many others. So this whole issue of our path forward is something to be well informed about, this whole issue of green growth versus degrowth, and this debate will increasingly enter public discussion. Right, so let's change tack. What do I see as some kind of framework or basis for action and making decisions around the council table? Well, being a geologist, I'm used to thinking in large, long time scales and large spatial scales. So ultimately, I would like to think that, or hope that most of us are concerned with the well-being of life on Earth, and indeed maintaining the conditions that support life on Earth. Now, as I touched on earlier, this means ensuring that human activity occurs within safe environmental limits. You'll be aware that local government is required to pass a climate lens over its decisions and activities. Now, this is a good step, But unfortunately, the climate crisis is just one of many symptoms of an underlying problem that is this: human activity in many spheres does exceed safe environmental limits. When I say safe, I mean limits that are consistent with stable conditions on Earth that support ecosystems and life itself. Now, these limits can be discussed or expressed or quantified in a number of frameworks, such as the planetary boundaries concept developed by the Stockholm Resilience Centre, or the ecological footprint concept, or the concept of overshoot. And you might have heard of Overshoot Day each year. That's the day in the year where we have used up all the resources, the demands on nature that nature can cope with, and beyond that, we're going beyond nature's ability to regenerate or absorb our wastes. Now, we know that our activity has far exceeded safe limits in many ways, both in terms of how much we take from nature, for example, deforestation, overfishing, water extraction, and then the burden that we impose on nature. That's our pollution and waste, for example, greenhouse gas emissions that drive the climate crisis, nitrates in our drinking water, microplastics, and so on. Now, this all has disastrous outcomes for ecosystems, for wildlife, natural cycles, and for us. But we can reduce our demands on nature. In fact, we've done it before. In the 70s and 80s, scientists reported a hole in the ozone layer over Antarctica. Now, this is a big deal because without the ozone layer to absorb damaging UV radiation from the sun, there would actually be no life on Earth. And if the trend in ozone depletion had continued unchecked, that hole would have grown to encompass the entire planet, and humans would have become extinct by about 2050. So obviously, research teams investigated the cause of the problem. They found it was the use of chemicals called chlorofluorocarbons in refrigerants. An international treaty was signed to end the use of these, let's call them CFCs. And today the whole ozone hole is decreasing. It should be back to the normal healthy state within a few decades. So there have been some hiccups along the way, as the compounds that were initially used to replace the CFCs are themselves very strong greenhouse gases, about 2,000 times stronger than CO2. So in turn they had to be replaced. But the message here, don't mess with the chemistry of the atmosphere, as we are doing now with greenhouse gas emissions. So back on track, let's get back on topic. I believe it is our shared responsibility to fix the problems that we create and to reorganize our economy and society so that human activity does occur within safe environmental limits. And I believe this should be a focus for the council, local government, and central government. So how does this consideration of safe limits translate to action and decision making in Nelson Whakatū? Well, let me give you 3 examples. We've touched on some of these earlier. First, how we get around. Our dependence on cars is simply not sustainable. It's vital that we shift to active and public transport. Active transport in particular has the benefits of reduced congestion, reduced air and noise pollution, huge financial savings, improved physical and mental health through exercise, and reduced need for parking space. Second, we can change where we live and the kinds of houses we build. Our business as usual, greenfield subdivisions like we're seeing in Richmond at Berryfields, and like what has been proposed for the Maitai Valley, over the lifetime of those buildings, they have 7 times the greenhouse gas emissions as what would be consistent with our Paris pledge. So intensification of the city centre is the key. Medium to high density apartments, shared infrastructure, able to live without owning a car, great for businesses in the city, great for attracting and retaining the talent we need for our businesses to thrive. Finally, how about taking care of nature? The 2 largest river catchments in the Nelson City Council area are the Maitai and the Waka Puaka. Both catchments are highly modified by human activity, and yet we don't have a catchment management plan for either area. This is highly needed, especially you see the devastating effects of the recent floods. Now, an obvious improvement would be to end the clear felling of pine forestry in these catchments. This would have the benefit of improved flood control, reduced soil degradation and loss, enhanced biodiversity if we replanted an indigenous forest, recreational opportunities, and the permanent sequestering of atmospheric CO2. Now, finally, I would just like to acknowledge those people who suffered during the recent floods. It will take some time to recover from this event, and it's important for those whose properties were damaged that they are not left in limbo and that they are not forgotten. I hope this video has given you some insight into my background and what I stand for. I'd be more than happy to discuss any of these points that I've raised with you, and of course I'd like to hear what's important to you. Feel free to contact me. My website, aaronstallard.co.nz, or find me on Facebook. Thanks for watching.